to the crowded courtroom. Miss Leavitt seems to think the rules bend for her convenience. His voice dripped with confidence, and a few hushed whispers rippled through the audience. Karoline, however, remained composed. She exhaled slowly, then straightened her posture. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, her tone steady but firm, "I am here to clarify facts, not assumptions. If you'd allow me the chance to present my side without interruptions." The judge let out another chuckle, this time leaning back in his chair. "Oh, I assure you, Miss Leavitt, you'll have all the time in the world to talk." His words lingered in the air like a storm cloud, heavy with implication. The air in the courtroom grew even more charged. Reporters, lawyers, and onlookers held their breath as the battle of words continued to unfold, each side waiting to see which way the judge would swing. The prosecutor's gaze shifted toward her, his fingers drumming against the desk in a slow, deliberate rhythm. His tone took on a sharper edge. "Or, do you think you can pull off some White House press tricks to outmaneuver us?" he challenged, a smirk creeping across his face. "I'd suggest you speak up now before I start questioning whether you even belong in this courtroom." A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery, this time louder, more confident. It wasn't just from the usual neutral onlookers. Some reporters joined in, clearly relishing the moment. A man in the back, sporting a MAGA pin, shook his head in frustration, but his disapproval was lost beneath the wave of amusement rolling through the room. Seizing the moment, the prosecutor stood again, his stance relaxed, but his hand resting firmly on his hip. "Your Honor," he said, voice dripping with mock concern, "maybe she thinks this is just another press briefing, where she can defend Trump with polished talking points and walk away. But today, we're not dealing with spin, we're dealing with cold, hard facts." He turned to her, his grin widening. "So, Miss Leavitt, do you actually have anything to say? Or should we just move on without you?" The laughter in the courtroom softened, then faded. A beat of silence followed, stretching long and heavy. Every eye in the room locked onto Leavitt, waiting. Anticipation hung thick in the air, an invisible current passing between the judge, the prosecutor, and the onlookers. And then, finally, she moved. Not in panic, not in hesitation. No, a small, knowing smile flickered across her lips. Not one of nervousness, not one of doubt, but the kind of smile that belonged to someone who held the upper hand. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her seat, smoothing the hem of her navy blazer with an unhurried grace. Her blonde hair caught the light for a brief second as she stepped forward, placing both hands on the table, her fingers splayed out with careful precision. Her gaze, calm and unwavering, first met the judge's, then drifted toward the prosecutor. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying that sharp Gen Z edge of sarcasm, "I'd like to extend my gratitude to the prosecution for what has truly been a remarkable performance. They nailed the drama. Seriously, I almost gave them a round of applause." She tilted her head slightly, the faintest trace of amusement tugging at her lips. But unfortunately for them, they chose the wrong script and, more importantly, the wrong opponent. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Even the scribbling of reporters' pens came to a halt, frozen mid-motion. The judge, who had moments ago worn an amused smirk, now sat up straighter, his narrowed eyes betraying a mix of curiosity and something else, surprise. The prosecutor's hand clenched the lapel of his jacket, his expression shifting. His earlier confidence wavered, if only for a second. Leavitt exhaled softly, then let her gaze sweep the room. "They say my silence was an admission of guilt," she continued, her voice measured, yet sharp as a knife. "But I wasn't silent out of fear. I was silent because I wanted to hear every word of their so-called evidence before I tear it to pieces." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. In the back row, a few Trump supporters exchanged knowing glances, their smiles creeping back as they sensed the tides beginning to shift. The judge banged his gavel, not in mockery this time, but to restore order. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his tone edged with intrigue. "If you have something meaningful to present, now would be the time. But I warn you, this courtroom is no place for theatrics." Leavitt barely nodded, her attention fixed on him like a laser. "Oh, I assure you, Your Honor," she said, voice unwavering. "This isn't theatrics. I'm simply here to show you what the law actually says, not what they want you to think it says." With that, she took a step forward, clutching a thick stack of documents, her ammunition, her arsenal. The weight of the moment settled over the room. Every eye remained glued to her as she flipped to a highlighted section and pressed her finger against the page. "This law they're using against me," she said, voice laced with authority. "It was written in 1939, before social media, before X, before TikTok. Before any of the platforms I used to communicate with the public even existed." She let that fact settle in the air before driving the point home. "So tell me, how exactly does a law written for a completely different era apply to me?" Reporters shifted in their seats, pens now moving rapidly, trying to capture every word. A few skeptics, who had initially dismissed her, now listened intently. Even the judge, glasses slipping down his nose, was no longer tapping his fingers. He was fully engaged now, scanning the document she referenced. The prosecutor, however, wasn't willing to lose ground so easily. He stood quickly, his voice rising in frustration. "This is a dodge," he accused, shaking his head. "She's deliberately twisting the law to shield Trump." Leavitt turned to him, her smirk sharpening like a blade. "A dodge?" she repeated, her voice dripping with amusement. "No, counselor. This is called logic. Something you apparently haven't caught up with yet." A few quiet chuckles broke out from the gallery. Some Trump supporters nodded in approval. She lifted the document again, pointing to a specific clause. "Let me simplify it for you," she continued, her tone shifting to one of mock patience. "Think of it like explaining a meme to someone who doesn't use X." More laughter. Leavitt pressed forward. "According to Section 5.2 of the Hatch Act, a violation must be directly tied to an election campaign. My statement? It was made on February 15, 2025, midway through Trump's term. No election in sight. So, what exactly are they charging me with? Reporting on policy." She flipped to another page, her voice growing even bolder. "And here's the kicker. If I had stayed silent during that briefing, I'd be violating my duty as press secretary. So my choices were, stay quiet and get sued for not doing my job, or speak up and get sued for stating the facts. Either way, the law contradicts itself." The judge raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting. He slid his glasses back on and flipped through his own documents, his finger tracing the very sections Leavitt had cited. The prosecutor cleared his throat, his voice losing its earlier confidence. "She's bending the law," he insisted, but it sounded more like an attempt to convince himself than the court. "The Hatch Act clearly applies to all abuse of power." Leavitt's eyes gleamed as she turned to him, her stance unshaken. "Abuse of power?" she echoed. "I was doing my job. You're the one trying to twist a law from the typewriter era to regulate a digital world. That's like using horse and buggy laws to fine an electric car. It's ridiculous." The gallery erupted with murmurs, some jurors exchanging uncertain glances. Leavitt set her documents down, crossing her arms. "Laws need to have principles, Your Honor," she said, her voice slowing but heavy with finality. "But this law? It's outdated. It's vague. And worst of all, it doesn't fit the world we live in." The judge tapped his gavel again, but this time, it wasn't to silence defiance, it was to regain control of a courtroom that had just witnessed a shift in power. His tone, now calmer, carried something new, a hint of respect. "Miss Leavitt," he said carefully, "are you suggesting this law has no value?" She held his gaze unwavering. "No, Your Honor. I'm saying it doesn't apply to me. And they know it." She gestured toward the prosecutor. "They're just using it as a weapon to silence me. To silence this administration. But I'm not here to play guessing games with outdated rules." A heavy pause filled the room. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. And Karoline Leavitt, standing at the center of it all, didn't move. She had landed the knockout blow. The judge adjusted his glasses. The prosecutor swallowed hard. And the courtroom waited for the verdict. Gallery, murmurs spreading like wildfire. A A few jurors leaned back, processing her words. The prosecutor clenched his fists, his face paling slightly, but Leavitt wasn't done. She stepped closer to the judge, her voice lowering just enough to pull everyone in. And let's talk about that quote. She flipped to another page, holding it up. Because I never said that. The room went still. They deserve it for standing against America? Funny. That phrase isn't in the official transcript. She tapped the paper lightly. And the White House records every briefing. So either I magically changed my words after the fact, or someone, she turned sharply toward the prosecutor, got creative with their sources. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The judge's eyebrows shot up. He reached for his own copy of the transcript, flipping pages. The prosecutor's mouth opened, then shut. Leavitt tilted her head, her smirk returning. Your Honor, this is what we call a bad fact check. And I'd love to know where they got this little recording. Because if it's real, why doesn't it match the official White House record? The judge's gavel came down, but his voice was thoughtful now, measured. Mr. Harrison, he said, turning to the prosecutor. Do you have proof that this recording is authentic? Harrison faltered. His fingers twitched at the edges of his suit jacket. It was submitted by an anonymous source, but… Leavitt interjected smoothly. Anonymous. Convenient. A few chuckles rolled through the crowd. The judge shot them a warning glance, but didn't immediately dismiss her point. Leavitt exhaled, then met the jury's gaze, her tone shifting from sharp to steady. This is what I mean when I say this trial isn't about the law, it's about silencing me. First, they used an outdated rule that doesn't apply. Now, they're throwing in last-minute, unverified evidence hoping something sticks. She gestured toward the jury, her voice unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, if the prosecution had real proof, they wouldn't need to move the goalposts mid-trial. They wouldn't need anonymous sources and dramatic reveals. They'd have had a case from day one. But they don't. And they know it. A pause. A moment of wait. Then the judge leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Mr. Harrison, he said slowly, without verified evidence, I cannot allow this recording to be considered in this trial. The prosecutor's face fell. The gallery erupted, reporters scrambling to update their notes, Trump supporters cheering outright. Harrison sputtered, trying to form a rebuttal, but the judge raised a hand. Enough. His voice carried a finality that silenced the room. He turned back to Leavitt. Miss Leavitt, do you have anything else to add before we proceed to final arguments? She picked up her documents, tapped them into a neat stack, and smiled, a real, confident smile. No, Your Honor. And with that, the momentum had shifted. The trial wasn't over, but everyone in the room knew it. Karoline Leavitt had just won the day.